Hello, my name is Joel Christ. I'm a developer with iSoftStone, and today I'm going to be doing a walk through the process of programmatically creating pivot tables in Excel 2007. Today I'm going to be using Microsoft Visual Studio 2008 to illustrate how to use the Excel 2007 primary interop assembly and the workbook.pivottable wizard method to programmatically add a pivot table to an Excel 2007 worksheet. So Microsoft Visual Studio, I'm going to come in and choose to create a new project. And today I'm going to do a C# Windows console application, and I'm going to name it Creating Pivot Table. So the first thing now I'm going to do in Visual Studio is to add a reference to the Excel 2007 primary interop assembly. So over here in the Solution Explorer, I'm going to right click on References, choose to add a reference. And I'm going to scroll down and select the Microsoft Office Interop Excel component here and choose the 2007 version. And then I'm going to add a using statement here for the Office Interop Excel namespace. That'll make it easier for me to use the classes and types in that namespace without having to specify the fully qualified namespace path each time. Okay, now I'm going to add the code to the solution that's going to create the pivot table. So I'm going to replace the body of the main method that was generated for us by Visual Studio with my own. And let's take a look at what this code is doing that we just added. Okay, so the code first declares or defines a method called setCellValue, which is a helper method used by the code below to set values into the worksheet. We declare some variables to hold on to the references to the Excel objects we're going to be working with, and we declare some variables for the name of the workbook, the name of the pivot table, and the name of the worksheet that will contain the pivot table. Create an instance of Excel, use that to then create a new workbook by adding a workbook to the workbooks collection. We get the first worksheet in there and set its name to the worksheet name variable, quarterly sales. And then we use our helper method, setCellValue, to add some data in columns A, B, and C for salesperson, region, and sales amount in cells A1 through C7. Next thing we do then is select the range of data for the pivot table, stuff that into a variable so we get the name range A1 through C7. We then select the location for the pivot table. We're going to place it in cell A11. And then we're all set up when we call the pivot table wizard method off the workbook object, specifying the data for the pivot table, the destination, and the pivot table name. Once we've created the pivot table, we then get a reference to the pivot table by referencing the pivot table by name off the pivot tables collection off the worksheet here. We get some regions here, ranges rather, for the pivot fields, sales region and sales amount. And then we start formatting the pivot table. We set the sales region as a row field, and we set the sum of the sales amount as a value field by specifying on that sales amount field, then setting the function property to be XLSum. And then lastly, we save the workbook out using our variable that we defined up above to save the workbook with the changes for the pivot table. Okay, so now I'm going to press F5 to build and run our console application. And it looks like it ran successfully, so that should have now created our workbook in our temp folder, which it did. If I open it in Excel, I get my workbook here. I've got my quarterly sales worksheet that we created or that we renamed. I've got my data that I added in cells A1 through C7 with my 3 columns. And now I've got my pivot table down here, which is working with that data. And we see my region and sales amount fields. The row labels are by region. The data is displayed by region here, and my sum values here is the sum of the sales. Just to verify that it's working okay, if I come in here and I select, I want to filter on just the East region, I'm able to do that. So it looks like the pivot table is working correctly. So by using Microsoft Visual Studio 2008 and the Excel 2007 primary interop assembly, it's pretty easy for me to create a Windows console application that created a workbook, added some data to it, and then used the workbook pivot table wizard method to add a pivot table based on that data.